with the show, as they say. Dr. Stan Napper is the founding dean of the College of Engineering at Houston Baptist University and is the incoming dean of the College of Science and Engineering there. Stan is a biomedical engineer by training, but has become a renowned authority on cyber engineering throughout the United States. Stan and his wife Vicki have 8 children, 6 sons and 2 daughters. So let's officially welcome him up here to our official stage.
Thank you.
Dr. Napper, good to see you. Dr. Dennis Adams, to my left over here, is a retired professor from U of H, where he focused on innovation strategy and information systems. He works with GLO and he does social media, information technology, strategy, helps us all so much. So they are going to be visiting up here for the centerpiece of today's luncheon. So please welcome both gentlemen.
It's our pleasure to chat today a little bit about a topic that's going to end up impacting us a whole lot: cybersecurity. The title of today's talk talks about cybersecurity in the 4th Industrial Revolution. When I talk to people about the 4th Industrial Revolution, they said we had more than one, but we're about to enter the 4th. So we're gonna kind of wander through a little bit while we chat about the different stages of our industrial revolution and kind of what we need to think about when it comes to security. My job is just to have a chat with Stan because he's the expert. So let's see what happens. Oh, good. You know, the guy who builds the slides shouldn't ever express surprise when they go up. So I've already screwed up here. So the first industrial revolution was about the transition to a new way of doing manufacturing. So before the first industrial revolution, everything was very, very manual. So we didn't have standardized processes, and the successful businesses, the successful farms were successful because the owner passed down to another generation how to do something. So processes weren't standard. We didn't have standard manufacturing processes. And that went from that changed about 1760 to machine-led processing. Oh, that sounds. Did I go away totally? It's better.
Better.
If I didn't talk
Right.
at all, would that even be better? Okay. So we went to a lot more machines, new chemical manufacturing sort of things to help us temper the things that we built, steam power, water power, development of tools. When you kind of think about it, all the tools before the first industrial revolution weren't mass produced. So there was a little bit of variance in all the tools we used. Once mechanization started, we standardized on tools. So when we talk about picking up a 30 millimeter wrench today, we know that wrench is the same all around the world. That wasn't the case before the first industrial revolution. So it made a lot of changes. People's incomes went up and people were healthier as a result of this. So that was a really wonderful thing. But it came with some consequences, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things I want to focus on today are some of the security concerns and the approaches to addressing those concerns that occurred during these different industrial revolutions. And then we'll get to talking about the future a little bit too at the end. But as I was thinking about this first industrial revolution, I wanted to acknowledge that security concerns did not appear when these machines and in the industry revolution appeared. There were security concerns throughout history, and I think we could look through history and find examples of phishing messages, fake news, insider threats, corporate espionage, threat assessment, regulation, compliance, enforcement issues, incident response, intrusion detection, and so on. even throughout history. If we read the works of the Iliad, the Odyssey, and other historical classical works, we'd find examples. My favorite examples that occurred before the Industrial Revolution come from the book of Nehemiah. I did a study on that, and I'm claiming that Nehemiah was the world's first cyber engineer. And he dealt with all the issues I just mentioned and more as he tried to accomplish the task that he had been given, the mission he had in life. But after the Industrial Revolution, as the steam-powered machines and factories they came along, they provided new types of threats and security concerns. So an enemy could attempt to withhold resources, withhold materials, withhold fuel, withhold or prevent the means of transportation that were all critical to the operation of those machines and factories. The threats, however, were localized. You could identify the assets that were trying to be protected. They were clearly identified. There were distinct resources. The theft of fuel or tools became security concerns. And these were the issues that they addressed. Identifying the source of the threat, the individuals responsible for the threat was more clear. It might come from a single disgruntled worker or an outside agent motivated by fear or jealousy or personal disagreement or competition. One of the main security concerns was in the safety of the workers in a dangerous environment. And these are issues I'm identifying from the first Industrial Revolution that haven't gone away. I was going to show the photo of the fire, the ITC fire down in not far from here, just a month ago. Was an example of a security breach of some kind or an accident. We don't really know what happened, but we can see the consequence. And I'm referring to the consequence here. Security in these types of operations, factories, could be delegated perhaps to a single armed guard, or perhaps there was no security agent. Everyone that worked there was responsible for security. That's kind of how I was looking at the first Industrial Revolution.
So things weren't quite as centralized before the first Industrial Revolution, but now as factories start being built, there becomes kind of this concentrated place where security needs to be viewed differently than just the gate outside of your farm or ranch. We have to look at security differently as our tools become more powerful, as our tools become more expensive, as the tools become more important. So we have to look at it differently. And that's the result of the first Industrial Revolution. But as we move forward, we now get to the second Industrial Revolution. Now this is from about 1870 to somewhere around the beginning of World War I. So the early innovations that had to do with the kind of the first Industrial Revolution, we end up seeing them being mass produced and then used in the production of more production. So when you get to a point in a civilization where you're using the tools that you build to help you build the next generation of tools, it kind of changes a little bit. So we move to a situation where I can't have built this machine until I built the tools to help me build this machine. And that's where we are with the second Industrial Revolution. The tools that we use to build the factories, to build the manufacturing facilities, didn't exist until we built them and learned how to build them in the first Industrial Revolution. So the second generation tools focused on the use of the telegraph, eventually the telephone, railroad networks, gas and water supplies, sewage systems, those kind of second order systems that helped us then build on top of those the systems that we ended up thinking about. Just a real quick thought, if you looked at how the railroads spread across the United States, there was a great deal of what we might call railroad baron activity, where people who had the capital and they had the ingenuity to try to corner the railroad market did so. So there was a lot of battles in the business world to try to become the owner of the most miles of railroad. Well, a lot of that happened because there were no laws to prevent it. So it took other systems time to catch up to the systems that were put in place for the second industrial revolution. So we see that one set of changes ended up impacting another. Now, when you look at how the railroad spread across the United States, one of the things that happened once the railroad was in, the telegraph started following along the railroad. And the reason was the right-of-way across all of that land had already been purchased or leased by the railroads. So the telegraph companies simply had to work with the railroad rather than all the individual ranchers and farmers across the United States. Now, one of the things we know about trains is they run out of steam. They have to put lots of, whether it's coal or lumber in there to create the steam to drive the trains back then. And every once in a while you had to reload the trains, put more water on, more fuel on. So you'd see across the United States big towns along the railroad being built around the places where you refueled the train. But it turns out the train can actually go further than the telegraph could. So little bitty telegraph stations along the way were built to resend the telegraph message. So as you look across the middle of America, you'll see big cities and lots of little ones dotting the railroad because the electrons would run out before steam. So we can see how the second industrial revolution actually changed the landscape of the United States. It also changed things like labor unions. And that was a security problem.
So the security concerns that resulted from the changes that Dennis were talking about, I think include things like the localized production. You can identify the resource that you were concerned about. If you're an attacker or an agent, you would look to attack the factory, and the threats became more advanced, and more advanced security was needed. And maybe the chief security concerns I was thinking was for uninterrupted and affordable power, electrical generation, distribution, and the threats included interruption of production, interruption of the schedule. Physical safety of workers was also a concern because these factories and the automation, the mass production that came along introduced new safety concerns for the workers. And there could be security concerns from the theft of materials, theft of instruments, theft of products. The assets that needed protected were more easily identified than today because they were within the grounds of the factory or the physical plant. They were location specific. So since the threats were localized and identifiable, it was a little easier to identify the source of the threats. The agents, the individuals, or the workers who had a beef of some kind, or maybe they were hired by someone to advance the security threats. So physical security then was implemented through controlled access that might have been delegated, perhaps to the armed guards at the gate, to the fences around the property, and so on. And so I'm just noticing that today you have the privilege of having a conversation between two college professors who really just like to talk and explain things in detail. I always wanted to have the passion and the position of a politician or a preacher. But God didn't call me that. He called me to be a college professor. And so that's kind of what you're hearing now as we give a history lesson. We are getting to the point in a few moments where we'll talk a little bit about the future, where we are today and where we're headed in the future. But let's look at the third industrial revolution next.
You say that like people don't want to hear two professors go on and on and on.
Well, I don't know if that's true or not. Certainly not. I know these Beta Academy students would never say that. Some of the older heads in the room might would. Some of my friends on the advisory board.
Well, you did do a good thing by saying, okay, there is a point to this. So that was good. Okay, so we're up to the third industrial revolution. Now, that one we don't need to spend much time introducing because we're living through it. Many of us in the room, not all of us, but many of us remember the time before there was a cell phone. I can remember my first computer that I had in my house, my Apple I and Apple II. I was so excited, my Commodore computer. So living through the third industrial revolution doesn't take a lot of explaining because we lived through it. We remember when we got our first cell phone, when we got our first laptop. Now, some of you don't, but that's all right. So what makes the third industrial revolution so transformative is the idea that it connects people around the world instantaneously. So it started with computer technology in the 1950s. The computers got smaller, more powerful. Eventually they ended up in our pockets and our purses. And now we have them connected with either cellular technology, digital technology, the internet, to make the world a different looking place. As a result, businesses change the way they do business because of the technology. And the reason we call it the third industrial revolution is because we can now hail a cab that isn't a cab, and Uber can drive you home. It's substantially changed the way we do business. So that's the third industrial revolution, and that's kind of what we're dealing with today.
It is, and the concerns exchange, they certainly expanded from protecting our physical assets to protecting our virtual assets. In addition to a theft or damage to the equipment or the tools, the instruments, or the products of the automation, now we're concerned about theft of information, theft of data, software, intellectual property, financial resources. These have become the chief security concerns in this revolution. And the consequence of those could be business interruption, falsification of data or processes, stolen data, stolen financial information, and even personal health records are security concerns. The assets that we're trying to protect include all of the computers, the servers, the transmission lines, the electronic control systems, the cell towers, and other mostly physical devices that support the computer information. So the concerns have become personal more as well as corporate and national. The threats that come across now, they impact us more personally, and all of us have some exposure to these security concerns. There are threats to energy, food, shelter. Expanded threats now include personal identity and our personal resources. The attack mechanisms that we're trying to defend against have advanced. They've moved through new forms of Trojan horses to more deceptive schemes and scams. And attackers today can enter the premises not through the back door or under the fence, but they can enter unseen through the firewall or through the email or through the virus that was downloaded as an attachment or through a web page. So attribution, identifying the source of the attack, has become much more difficult because physical presence is not required to make an attack of some kind or a security breach. And so the consequence to the security team is it's become more delegated, where once it was delegated, and maybe still is delegated to the armed guard at the gate. Now security is delegated to the IT staff, and it requires a different set of specialized training to implement security mechanism. And the tools of security have become not guns and fences, but software patches, firewalls, antivirus software, etc. And access to our protected assets is now controlled not just by gates and guards, but by passwords, two-factor authentication, security questions, CAPTCHA, and even some limited biometric authentication, the fingerprint scans, retina scans, keyboard patterns. And now, as I think this is still a part of the third industrial revolution, as the software has become more advanced, more autonomous, more intelligent, both the defenders and the attackers have to increase their sophistication and use more autonomous, intelligent software. And there's a lot of that software available out there. I was highlighting here some software that you can obtain today that would mimic any person's voice. I'm going to highlight today some remarks I heard from a futurist talking about the future of cybersecurity, and he mentioned this as an example, and the quality of the voice reproduction is so good with a few lines of voice input. It can mimic another voice, and this futurist asked a group of chief information officers, how are you going to protect your CEO's voice pattern? Now, I'm bridging sort of between the third industrial revolution and the fourth industrial revolution, but there are new concerns along the way.
So just taking, what's it called, Lyrebird?
Lyrebird.
So that's a technology that I assume it's kind of smart, so it's AI-ish maybe, or something like that. And you feed it some words or something like that.
Yes, so we've all used speech recognition, and this uses speech recognition, but it's more advanced. So it repeats or vocalizes a phrase based on the voice pattern that has been entered.
I think I saw something like that on like a James Bond movie or Mission Impossible. But so if I took took Carl's voice here, and he's left me a few voicemails over the years. I grabbed those, put them in the right order, shipped it up to this thing. I could then say, use Carl's voice.
Yes, then Carl's voice could give my talk. I could enter all these words into the Lyrebird, and you would hear Carl speaking.
Or
I could call Linda. We're using this, and she would think it was Carl on the phone. And who knows what Carl might ask her if I was typing the script for Carl.
So it's kind of interesting that if you got a phone call and the caller ID didn't seem right, but the voice on the other end did, are you going to trust that person? How many would trust? Say, oh, that's my mom.
My mom.
Because you would assume that it's my mom's voice. There must be something wrong with the phone. So you assume. That's one of the things that makes, humans we're great folks. We like to assume the best. So if I hear my mom's voice on the phone, I'm going to assume, oh great, it's my mom, I want to talk with her. I don't assume it's not my mom. So Lyrebird preys on, or can be used, it's not a tool built for that, but it could be misused, isn't it?
Right. That's right.
So what do you think could protect us from Lyrebird? It's okay to say nothing.
It's going to force us to be more skeptical and take a second effort to identify the source of the information, the source of the voice, the source of the photo. And we can't assume, like we once did, that what we're looking at is what we're really looking at, what we're hearing is what we're really hearing. And it'll make us become more alert. I'll try not to use a scary word, but it'll make us more alert.
I think some of us might remember an open mic conversation where President Reagan was talking about the bombers have launched or something like that. And people kind of got a little nervous about his joke, but I think we now can see the importance of the voice, and this technology is kind of scary. What else do you think we should worry about?
Well, let's move into the fourth revolution and talk about those things.
I think we should worry about the fourth because that's where it's really interesting. Now, it's not like we solved all the problems with the third industrial revolution. Third industrial revolution gave us worms and viruses and malware, all of that stuff. We're still dealing with that today. So personally, I'd like a little bit of a rest and say, okay, let's not do that fourth generation yet so we can solve these problems. But even back in the first revolution, the Luddites, if you've heard that term, somebody's a Luddite who doesn't like technology, that was a group of people who went in and destroyed the looms because the looms were taking the jobs of people. So a fictitious person named Ned Ludd was created, and these people went and destroyed the manufacturing looms that made fabric in the first industrial revolution. So that's same sort of thing is happening today. So just because we go from one generation to the other doesn't mean that we're solving it. It just means here we are. So with the fourth industrial revolution, we are talking robotics, artificial intelligence, nanotechnology. You know what? Nanotechnology is stuff that's like a billionth of an inch. So tiny. Quantum computing. I want to have a long conversation with somebody who really understands quantum computing. It will be a long conversation because I am stupid. All the biotech stuff, Dr. Napper's PhD is in biomechanical engineering, is that right?
Biomedical.
Biomedical. So we're putting stuff into our bodies that are digital and computer controlled, the Internet of Things, the industrial Internet of Things, 5th generation phones. I can't wait to get mine. So all of these things, this is what the fourth generation is all about. And since we haven't solved all of the security things for the first three, are we screwed?
We're still smart, and we're still developing technology that helps us address the security concerns of the new technology. So it's not hopeless by any means, but we just need to be aware of the problem. It's a growing problem, and it's impacting each of us more and more. I want to mention about the intersection of virtual systems, information systems, with physical systems, and that's a little bit about what Dennis was describing. This is where the security concerns have moved. At least that's what I'm learning as we're building this College of Engineering, and I'm talking to people in the industry. The Internet of Things.
Testing, 1, 2, 3.
That was
That's liar
that's an
bird.
attack.
Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to the HADA Spring Luncheon.
Wow,
I'd like
this
to
is beautiful.
recognize our
This is
sponsors,
beautiful.
American Financial
So
Automotive
do you know who their guest speaker is
Stand
next
to be
door?
recognized, please.
Who is it? Nikki Haley, former U.S. ambassador. So they're right through that door.
Man. I don't know whether to believe Dennis or not.
It is.
Before everyone leaves, I do want to make a couple of comments about the convergence of technology, the convergence of the information technology and the operational technology. This is the place where I think we need to be concerned about. This is the reason why, one of the reasons why we've created the College of Engineering at HBU with a cyber engineering degree. This is why colleges and universities around the country are developing cybersecurity programs, because the security concerns are now more widespread. They're not just affecting banks and factories, governments and stores, but every small business, every building, every individual are now susceptible to security concerns. I'm speaking about the integration of devices of every kind, large and small devices, sensing devices and actuating or doing devices, receiving devices, transmitting devices, devices that perform electronic representation of information and electronic transmission of information and data. And all of this has become more prevalent, more personal, more private. I want to show them the overwhelming. If we were to try to describe the Internet of Things, it would be overwhelming. So I'm not asking you to read any words on there, but if every word on there was a different type of device in a different environment, in a different location, impacting a different aspect of your life, you would begin to feel the weight of the overwhelming growth of the Internet of Things. They're saying that today there are probably 50 billion devices that are connected to one another, to the internet, to all the other devices in the world. 50 billion devices, and there's only between 7 and 8 billion people in the world, and we're already at that point. So that's maybe more than 5 devices per living person across the planet. These devices are distributed. They are embedded, they exist inside of other devices, they're ubiquitous, they're everywhere. They're in lighting systems and air conditioning systems, entertainment systems, and commonplace items. And they're autonomous. They make decisions on their own. to some degree. They are present in places and tools that we don't expect. They're used in mechanical devices that we never thought of as also being electronic. They are above us, below us, around us. They're high above us. And maybe they're even in us. One of the things that attracted my attention the most about a year and a half ago, right soon after I came to HBU, was a recall that was issued by the Food and Drug Administration on pacemakers that had already been implanted in 465,000 people. Imagine getting a letter in the mail, your pacemaker has been recalled. It didn't mean that they had to have a surgery. It meant that they had to go in and get a software upgrade to their pacemaker. These things are now controlled, manipulated by the cardiologist wirelessly. My mother-in-law has a pacemaker. She has to dial on a landline, and the phone squeaks and squawks a little while. About once a month, it takes data from her pacemaker. And that's probably not even the most current technology.
Now, just to make sure, I don't want to blow past this one. You have to get an update for your heart.
For your pacemaker, in order for your heart to work smoothly and effectively.
So the people who make these devices, I assume there's no real profit motive for them. So they're the highest quality software developers, the highest quality hardware developers. They're doing this out of the kindness of their heart, right? No.
I know some biomedical engineers that do it out of the kindness of their heart.
But maybe there's some that...
I bet there's some students here that are going to go into biomedical engineering, and they're going to advance the technology out of the kindness of their heart.
I just kind of, when I put in a Wi-Fi light socket in my house this weekend, thought I was all happy with it, and then because I already paid for it, installed it, and then I start reading the blog about it, and they said, well, this was made in China, and apparently they can hack my light bulb. It's like, well, see, when you buy something off of Amazon and it gets Amazon Prime and you can get it in 2 days, and it was the cheapest one you can buy, you start saying, I'm just going to get that one. But now they've hacked my backyard. Well, they're welcome to my backyard, but then to control this Wi-Fi device, I had to give it access to my home Wi-Fi. Well, I do banking on that. I got my pictures on there. I'm not so excited about them knowing what Netflix I'm watching. They can have my backyard, but I don't want you to have my playlist. So you see, you can't really tell where it begins and ends once these things are connected.
That's the point. This is the integration of devices and data, integration of hardware and software, integration of operational technology and information technology. And operational technology, I think my assumption is most people understand what information technology is. That's what we're dealing with computers and networks and data. Operational technology, though, includes all of the valves, pumps, meters, sensors, turbines, furnaces, reactors, generators, IV pumps, ICU monitoring stations, MRI, CAT scan, and other imaging equipment, implanted medical devices, elevator controls, fire protection systems, HVAC, entertainment systems. All of this is the industrial Internet of Things, and all of these have merged. The technology has merged. And so there are some implications to the security concerns. There are some national concerns. I have a slide on the 16 critical infrastructure sectors that Department of Homeland Security monitors, because every one of them is important to our health and well-being in the United States. I have a photo also of a cargo ship that's been exploded. There are over 24 electronic or control systems on a single cargo ship that have to interact with one another, interact with the port, interact with the other ships, and any one of those systems is a target or is a risk, it's a threat, it's a security concern. So the security concerns, in addition to all those physical concerns that we mentioned in the first, second, and third revolution, there's a risk here of total system failure, interruption of production, threats to life and life safety systems. And we're still concerned about the theft of personal information. But in this convergence, we are also concerned about the threat of a single intrusion. You read in the news about 500 million identities were stolen, or 100 million identities were stolen. We're concerned about that. We have to do everything we can to prevent that. But a single intrusion, one theft, one intrusion into a factory where one control valve could be changed could start that fire that I showed at the beginning. I don't know that that's what caused the ITC fire, but it could be the kind of thing that causes that kind of disruption. So the assets that we're trying to protect now go beyond the factories and the computers. That includes every connected device in a system. I visited one of the healthcare systems in town recently, and they spoke about having to protect 30,000 endpoints. Each one is an opportunity to enter their system. They have to be monitored continuously. A hospital now has a threat intelligence officer monitoring continuously, not just once a day, non-stop, continuously, the potential threats that might enter in one of those 30,000 endpoints that would affect their information or their patient delivery, service delivery. So the source of the threats are much harder to identify. It's harder to attribute. Where is that coming from? Who is the person behind that? There are ways to do that, but it's becoming harder. Those are some of the changes imposed by this new revolution. The attacks are more sophisticated, they're more integrated, they're more widespread. The attackers are more sophisticated, more organized, more widespread. Criminal enterprises are now organized around cyber attacks. Nation states are employing those criminal organizations and developing their own systems. So responsibility for security is no longer delegated to the armed guard at the gate or even to the IT staff. Security is now an integrated responsibility assigned to every employee. This reminds me of a visit I had the opportunity to make about 3 or 4 years ago to a laboratory of the National Security Agency. And during the tour, they took us through an apartment, looked like a house, and it had a living area and a kitchen area and a bedroom area. And they were showing us the different risks, the devices that were there that were security threats, the television, the crock pot, the weather station. And so my question to the lab director that was given the tour was, how are you going to protect us all? And they said, well, we're not. There's no way that they can. And his response was that every citizen must become a cyber defender. And there are mechanisms, and that's another whole talk about what you need to do to protect yourself with passwords and password managers and other types of software. But this interface between the cyber physical systems requires a new type of worker with a new type of training that understands both the operational technology and the information technology. And we're defining that as cyber engineering. That's what a cyber engineer would be, is someone who can understand both the electronic systems, the control systems, the devices, as well as the computers, the information, and those. And there's a great need for those. I'm hearing that as I go to conferences from the federal government, wide variety of agencies, even the Army Corps of Engineers talking about their need for cyber engineers. And by corporate executives, I've been meeting with chief information officers, chief information security officers, and they're describing the desperate need for those who can design security into the system, not just add it on or protect the system after it's already built. We have to design systems that are resilient and able to respond to attacks on their own to some degree. I wanted to show the photo of the job opportunities. I'm tracking job opportunities. Last week there were 4,191 jobs in Houston for cybersecurity professionals, and Houston as a metro area is not producing enough people to meet the needs. I'm thinking we need to wrap this down a little bit.
We do.
If you don't mind if I jump ahead to the future.
Please do.
Okay? Actually, I wish I would spend the whole time. That's the easiest part to talk about, because who can contradict you if you're talking about the future?
Nehemiah is up behind you.
Good. So the next big revolution is, if there's a fifth industrial revolution on the way. Dennis asked me to think about the fifth industrial revolution. It may not be industrial at all. I think that word may not be descriptive. I'm kind of thinking, especially from my background in biomedical engineering, that I think we have to keep track of developments in biomedical technology. Just like in the 80s and 90s, 2000s, where the distinction between a drug and a device became clouded. And the Food and Drug Administration was trying to regulate those as separate things, with separate policies and separate agencies. But there were so many products that integrated those. I think we're going to see new products that integrate not just the OT and the IT that I've been talking about, but integrating biomedical data directly with devices. That's what I'm thinking, that we're moving to the point where the interface of biology and electromechanical technology, the interface of a biomedical presence with a technological presence, man and machine, that is somewhere in the horizon, maybe the next generation. So I also had a photo of a DNA sequencer. I listened to a futurist speak to a bunch of chief information security officers, and he showed a picture of a handheld DNA sequencer. He said, I could get the discarded coffee cup from your CEO at the coffee shop and get enough of a sample to put into this handheld $1,000 DNA sequencer and produce a complete genetic profile. And the question that the futurists asked to the information security officers, how are you going to protect your CEO's genetic information? Everything we talked about before included information, included devices and systems, but now it's even more personal than before if your genetic information is at risk. This futurist talked about the shift from information security to OT security, that's what I've been talking about, to eventually genetic security. So the biggest concern may be not only protecting the information, but protecting your personality, your ability to interpret data and truth. So in addition to genetic security, this futurist talked about cognitive security. We're in a day of fake news and propaganda and phishing messages and others that are getting harder and harder for us to discern. And the Lyrebird was an example of that technology, and lots of other apps that are available like that. So how will our employees, our businesses, our partners, how will they protect themselves, their personality in the fifth industrial revolution? And the answer is that we have to be more sophisticated, and we have to accept security as our own personal job. And so I'm back to Nehemiah. I tried to start with Nehemiah as an example of the world's first cyber engineer. And one of the principles that Nehemiah employed with his team to keep the families, the workers, the enterprise secure was that every worker had in one hand a sword and in one hand a trowel. And so that's part of the answer. All of us have to see ourselves as workers, healthcare workers, IT workers, government workers, and defenders, cyber defenders. And now I'm looking for young people that would join us in the college so we can train people of the tools, the technologies, and the fundamental principles that they'll need to anticipate and respond to those. It's not hopeless. I hope, Dennis, that we haven't created a sense of fear in the room. We have smart people on the good side, and in fact, one of the things that our world needs is ethical employees. I would hope that HBU would be a good source of that, not just in engineering, but in the other programs that we offer.
So we've taken a little tour through history, starting from before the Industrial Revolution all the way to we don't know, but it's going to be a heck of a ride. I think you can choose to be optimistic. I choose to be optimistic. But we know that the technology is changing rapidly, and we know that people don't. And that creates a hole for bad folks to do things. So we have to be vigilant. We have to work at making those passwords stronger than you think you should, even though it's a pain in the rear to do that. And you need to apply those software updates, even though it may break something. But you still have to keep doing that, because as Stan said, we're all in this together. And it may be your password on your laptop at home is what makes your family vulnerable. So make it your responsibility too.